Welcome to episode 2 of the Voices of Boyle podcast. My name is Florence Cortaro, and today I'll be chatting with Donal O'Connor, or as we know him locally, Donie O'Connor. Donie is a Boyle man through and through. Born and raised in the town, he is well known for his songwriting and musical talents. Donie has made and is still making huge contributions to Boyle and is part of many local committees and groups. Today we're going to touch on Donie's early memories of growing up in Boyle. We're going to chat about his love of music and where his biggest inspirations came from. The bulk of our chat will focus on Donie's recent epic cycling challenge, which took him all the way from Achill in the west of Ireland over to Auschwitz in eastern Poland. Donie takes us on his journey with him as we talk about the highs, the lows, the challenges and the triumphs of his journey. I really enjoyed the chat with him, and I'm sure you guys will too. So welcome to the Voices of Boyle podcast, Donie. We want to say a huge thank you for your time for joining us today.
Thank you, Florence, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, great to have you. You're a local Boyle legend.
I'm not so sure about the legend bit, but I am local to Boyle, yes, very much so.
A local legend. We're delighted to have you on. So, Donie, let's get straight in. We're going to touch maybe a little bit on your music career first and then talk about your the recent cycling adventure that you undertook in the last few weeks. So let's just take a step back in time before we get into the bulk of the interview. Tell us a little about you, where you were born, where you grew up, and how your lifelong love of music came about.
Well, I was born on the Crescent, within sight of the town's clock, just opposite St. Joseph's Hall. I was a child of the 60s. I would presume whatever bit of music I might have in me would have come from my maternal grandfather, who was John Dwyer from Ballinafad, and he was a traditional Irish musician. He was a fiddle player, and he moved into Boyle from Ballinafad and set up house in 5 Elphin Street, where my cousins the Hickeys still live. So that's where my mother grew up, and there would have been music in that house. Now, unfortunately, he died a young man. And I never knew him. He died 20 years before I was born. But I have a song called Granddaddy's Fiddle because I own his fiddle. And I'm very proud to own it. So I'd say that's probably where a lot of the music came from. Also, Florence, I grew up opposite St. Joseph's Hall. And I grew up in the time of show bands. So there were lots of show bands coming there. Every Friday night it seemed like there was a different show band and a different dance on. And it came to the point where myself and, the Brennans and the McGees and the O'Connors and the Dodds and everybody and the Morrises and the Farrells who grew up on the Crescent, we all knew these guys because they would come fairly regularly, and we sort of knew them, and they were almost like our friends coming time and again to St. Joseph's Hall to play. And if I could just tell you one little story.
Yeah.
There was a band called the Hoedowners, Sean Dunphy and the Hoedowners, and they were quite famous. And I was about 7 or 8, and we were helping the Hoedowners in with their gear, probably interfering with them, bringing their gear in, to be honest. But one of them asked me, "Do you have a television in your house?" And I said, "Yes, we do. We had an old black and white rickety television." And he says, "Will you ask your mother if we can call over to watch television at 7 o'clock?" So I went over and asked my mother, and she said, "No problem, send them over." So they all came over at 7 o'clock to watch television. But it was to watch themselves on television. They had a program. There was a weekly program called The Hoedown, which featured the band, the Hoedowners. So can you imagine, as a 7 or 8-year-old boy in your kitchen with about 8 lads who were watching themselves on television? Like, even if that happened today, it would be a buzz. But happening back in the 60s, when, if you saw somebody who had been on television, you'd almost genuflect in front of them.
Wow.
But I had them in my kitchen, watching themselves. So I've told that story 1,000 times, but I often think that maybe that drew me in a little bit to having a sort of an involvement with music, or a love of music as well. But many other things as well. My brother sort of leaned a little bit towards folk music, and I can remember him for some reason coming home with a Planxty album, and Planxty were a great folk a folk group of the 70s and been sort of startled by that music. And I had a friend called Martin Candon from Great Meadow, and he used to, when I would visit his house, he had records. I don't know whether they were belonged to him or I think they were belonged to his sister's boyfriend. But he had records like Simon and Garfunkel and James Taylor and all of that. And I was just electrified by that type of gentle folk, Americana, Irish traditional, all of those type of things. I never one for the heavy sort of metal stuff. I have other relatives in my family who are big into that, and you know some of them. But no, never went there. You know, can appreciate it, but mine would be the softer, gentler acoustic music. And I think those are the places that they came from, that the interest came from.
Fantastic, Donie. And how old were you, just to give an idea, when you were listening to that kind of music?
I would say I wasn't listening to music seriously until I was probably 12, 13, 14.
Right.
That time, you know. Back then, Florence, like I was born in 59, and like back then, you know, people had sort of record players in their house, but not everybody had the access to music that there is today. You know, it was old vinyl records, and I remember a time in my life when we didn't have a record player in the house. You know, we had a black and white television, but we didn't have a record player, and I remember saving money as a teenager to buy a record player from Mrs. Farrell from the electrical shop where Jackpots is now.
Wow.
So, like, you know, we weren't as exposed to the amount of music that young people are now.
Different times, Donie.
Yeah, different times. And we were sort of more like peasants back then, but we were every bit as happy.
Yeah, we had you had less, but you appreciated more.
You really appreciated what you had, and what you heard musically, you devoured it.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't hear it terribly often, and you devoured it.
Yeah. And today, I suppose we have access to everything, just the click of a button. So you do appreciate it less today, just because it's so readily available.
I think so.
You know?
I think so. Yeah.
And I was talking to a little birdie. I said I was going to interview you, and he was telling me that you used to have an Ovation guitar.
Yes.
Back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And you wrote some great music with that guitar.
Yeah.
Can you hit on that a little bit?
Well, the Ovation was, you know, people like Paul Brady. I don't know when the Ovation was invented, but it was a round back guitar, and I was a bit sort of smitten by the whole notion of this style of a guitar. And there was one for sale in Alan Audio's shop in Sligo, second hand, and I saved a few bob and I bought it. And that guitar travelled around the world with me, and it was broken in an airport. And above all cities for it to be broken in, it was broken in Nashville, Tennessee.
No way.
The arm was sliced off it by it. Look, we were very naive back then. It was in a soft case when it should have been in a flight case. But the whatever the airline paid for its repair, no, it was never really the same again.
It's sentimental.
Yeah. But it's long gone. I'm not sure where it is now. It's in, I traded it in Rose Morris's music shop in Soho in London.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And Donie, Charlie McGettigan, Bernard Flaherty, all of these people would have been big influences on your music.
Absolutely. I qualified out of college, and I went to work as a health inspector, later to be known as an environmental health officer. I went to work in Donegal for a couple of years. And then I came back, and I think I was about 22 when I came back, or maybe gone 23, I'm not sure. But for a very short while, I was lost in Boyle because all of my own classmates had either gotten married young and were living a married life, or had left altogether. And I was sort of single in my early 20s, and all of a sudden, Florence, I had a week's wages and I had money to go out and socialise. And I remember going over to the Cayley House bar one evening, and I knew all the Morrises all my life. They were friends of mine. But Bernie Flaherty was there, and he was playing music, and I just fell in with Bernie. Now, Bernie would be 2 years older than me, but musically we just came together, and we stuck together for probably, we're still together. We still play from time to time, but we were together sort of seriously for probably, the guts of 15 years, I'd say. And like, we were part of the furniture in the Moyle Erg for every Sunday night. It was nearly part of the week. We owned our own stools in the Moyle Erg and spent far too much time in it, let it be said. But no, we just bashed away, and I'm not sure that we rehearsed an awful lot. We played rough and tumble music.
But I'd say you didn't even need to rehearse, Donie. It was what came. It was the natural flow of it.
There was that. And like Bernie is a gifted musician. He plays many instruments and has a great interest in country music as well, which I didn't really have. And I would thank Bernie for exposing me to that. But he was just a great guy, and we had great crack over those years. Crazy stuff. Some stuff that would not be suitable for exposure on a podcast like this. But
maybe we might have another version.
But like there's some great. You mentioned Charlie there. In more recent years, I just got to know Charlie a bit better, probably through writing music, because he's a great writer, and I would be influenced by the writing of Charlie and the writing of many other people, like Jimmy McCarthy from Cork and Mick Hanley from Limerick, and there's a guy called his name. Another Limerick man called Don Mescal, who writes some wonderful stuff. So I would be influenced by the Bernie Flahertys of this world, and let it be said, Francis Gaffney altogether.
Right.
Also, because Francis plays a lovely style of accompanying traditional music on a guitar, and I would have been influenced a lot by Francis's playing. And a fine guitarist he is.
Fantastic, isn't it? Yeah, brilliant, Donie. So I think I could talk about music forever, and especially with someone like yourself that has had such an impact on music locally. But we'll dive into your trip now, and we'll get into the reasons for doing that and what kind of adventure that you had. And as I said before we started recording, maybe another time we can come back and literally have a full episode of your memories of Boyle, your music career, songwriting career, and everything that came with that.
Well, that'd be great.
Yeah. If you'll talk to me after today, we'll see how this goes.
Will you stop? Yeah.
So, Donie, the big adventure.
Yes.
Let's just give some stats to those of you that maybe aren't on Facebook and didn't follow along the journey online. So, Donie left Achill on April the 18th. He cycled all the way to Auschwitz in Poland, and he arrived on June 28th. He spent 54 days cycling, with the longest kilometre cycled on a day distance being 111 kilometres, which is very impressive. He did it completely solo, no support team apart from his phone calls at night from the campsites and a visit from Mandy in Vienna, I believe.
You've done your research very well, Florence.
Total kilometres cycled 2,807. And he travelled only 130 kilometres by bus. He cycled through 7 different countries from start to finish, and finally raised a massive €11,319 for the crisis in Ukraine, which is hugely impressive. So they're the stats if you haven't followed along on Donie's journey online. So to start, Donie, what inspired you to do the trip? How did it come about?
The inspiration came at different times from 2 or probably 3 different sources. Basically, I retired from my work as an environmental health officer in 2021. And my retirement gift, in the years leading up to my retirement, I had grown towards having quite a healthy interest in cycling. Mm-hmm. And myself and my wife had done a couple of the greenways around Ireland. There's one over in Achill, one down in Waterford, and we'd done them and really enjoyed them. And I thought, as a gift to myself for my retirement, I wanted to go on a long cycle. And my wife, Mandy, she's a saint in the sense that she should have thrown me out after about a month of planning of this. But I was sort of quietly planning that trip across Europe for probably 2 years leading up to my retirement. Right. And I meant to do it in the following summer, which didn't happen because of COVID. So I was a year late doing it. Right. So it was always going to happen as a gift to myself for my retirement. The reason I picked to cycle across Europe was that many years ago I was doing a gig in Germany, and I met a guy called Hulm, a lovely young man, and I sort of detected from our conversation, he was a couple of years younger than me, that he would have been in his prime when the wall came down. And he had lived in East Germany, which was on the communist side of the wall. So he would have been curtailed in his life up until 1989 when the wall came down. And I says, Hulm, what did you do when the wall came down? And he said, "Oh, Mr. Donal," he says, "I loved the West." He said, "When I was young, I would steal magazines that would come from the West. I would examine the photographs with a magnifying glass. I would look at the beautiful ladies in the photograph, but I would also look at the labels in the products behind the beautiful ladies on the shelf." He says, I was taken by the amount of colour that you had in the West that we didn't have in Eastern Europe. So when the wall came down, I just needed to go west and west and west. So he says, I got on my bicycle and I cycled and I cycled. And I said, "Where did you end up?" He says, "I ended up in Achill Island in Ireland."
Are you serious?
Yeah, and I just thought, what a man. He says, "I had very meagre savings. I went to the bank, I withdrew my money, I had my bike serviced, and I cycled to Achill Island." He says, I didn't care where I cycled, I was just going west. And I just thought this was an amazing little story. And I said, someday I would love to do that. So then when my retirement was coming up, I said, that's what I will do. I will do where he lived. He lived in a town called Jena in what would have been politically East Germany once upon a time, which is quite close to Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided that I would do it in the other direction from which Holm did it. So I was doing Achill to Jena and on to Auschwitz instead of the way that Holm did it. So that was one of the inspirations for it.
Fantastic.
The other was I was really taken and touched by the Syrian refugees during the Syrian war, which is still going on. And, they left Syria and they basically, burst their way illegally, some people would say, into Europe. But I think Europe should have opened its doors to them anyway. And a lot of them, you remember 2 and 3 summers ago, they just walked across Europe, some of them aimlessly, with nothing, only their own intellect and their own luggage with them. And I thought, how easy is it for me to do the opposite? To cycle across Europe with a credit card in my back pocket. And if it all goes belly up, I can get a flight home.
Yeah.
So it was Holm who cycled to Achill when the wall came down, and it was the Syrian refugees who really, fired me up towards saying, this isn't impossible. Let's just do it. Now, let it be said, Florence, I've gotten a lot of plaudits for raising the money for Ukraine, and really they are somewhat undeserved because that cycle was going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
But it was almost a last minute thing when I had all my plans made and the whole lot, Mr. Putin invaded Ukraine, and I just thought, hold on, we can kill 2 birds with one stone.
Fantastic.
Here. We can do a fundraiser as well. Now, if that hadn't happened, I was going on that cycle. The cycle was not a fundraiser, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you were taking that journey anyway, but it was a nice touch.
Absolutely.
It was a nice touch.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was really taken aback by the reaction. Because really all I did was put up a GoFundMe page on Facebook, which took me about 15 minutes. I'd say it would take you about 2 minutes, but it took me about 15 minutes to do it. And all I did beyond that was just to post a sort of an update every 3 to 4 days. And I began to detect, I had always heard and always thought that a message on Facebook that's short and sweet is the way to do it. But on one of the posts, it might have been the 5th or 6th post, I ravelled on a bit.
Yes.
Just like I'm doing now.
You're okay. You're doing perfect. Yeah.
But I noticed that there were more donations when the post was longer.
It's the story, Donie. And I find that myself as well. People say short and sweet, but we're all get involved. We all want to hear someone else's story. And it's the details you gave that got people involved, I think.
Yeah. Well, in any way, whatever it was, the longer the posts seemed to be, whether it was that they contained greater detail or more interest for people or whatever, but the longer the posts were, the more people, I could see the donations coming in more regularly after a longer post. So I decided, forget about the short and sweet, let's be a bit long-winded about this. So I made my posts a bit longer, and that seemed to up the donations. But really, Florence, it wasn't the donation part of it or the raising of the money part of it was not difficult. I didn't handle money. It just came through me, through my Facebook post, straight into
fantastic
UNICEF's
platform.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Now, sorry, I have to go back. Some people who said, pushed 50s and 20s into my back pocket and says, I'm not on Facebook, I'm not online, put that on for me. So I did handle a very small amount of money, but I would say probably 200, 300, 400 pounds I handled, but it was in one hand and out the other. So, but generally the majority of the money, I didn't touch at all.
Fantastic,
Yeah.
Donie. And just to go back a little bit, I suppose, to the preparation for the trip, you said it was in planning for 2 years.
Yes.
So what did your preparation involve in terms of, was it very intense when it came to your diet, fitness, getting your gear ready? Can you tell us a little bit about that and what gear you brought with you in terms of your bike and your equipment?
Yeah, well, look, if I can just go just before that, I made a great discovery which made the planning quite easy, is that, nowadays what we hear in terms of planning in Ireland, you hear a lot of talk about new greenways emerging all over the country.
Yes.
And I happen to, some people know this, I didn't know it 2 or 3 years ago, but there is a series of, for the want of a better word, greenways throughout Europe. They're called Eurovelos. And there are 15 Eurovelos that it's basically a network of cycle paths all across Europe. And I went online, there's a Eurovelo website, and I went online to see where these paths went. And I saw that if I stayed on Eurovelo 6 and then moved to Eurovelo 9, I think it was, that would bring me from Nantes on the Atlantic Ocean on the west of France almost to Auschwitz, just by 2 Eurovelos. So that made the route was almost preordained for me. So I went 2,000 kilometres from Nantes in the west of France. Sorry, I cycled from Achill to Dublin in stages.
Yes.
Over 5 days, not continuous days, a day here and a day there. 5 stages, went to Dublin, dismantled my bike, went on a Ryanair flight to Nantes in the west of France. Then I cycled 2,000 kilometres to Vienna. And that was all on Eurovelo 6. Never left that cycle path. Now, that cycle path brought me, uphill, down Vale, in through back alleys in little villages and through farmyards, through various different forms of landscape. Some of them beautiful, but it pretty much hugged the Loire River and the Rhine and then the Danube, all the way into Vienna. 2,000 miles on the one path.
Unbelievable. So that made the planning pretty easy in terms of your route planning.
Yes. And likewise, then Mandy met me she came out for 3 days in Vienna. We had that prearranged. And so I took 3 days away from cycling, and we had a bit of a ball in Vienna. We went to a classical concert and we ate out and we drank a few beers and that type of thing. And then I went due north out of Vienna along Eurovelo, and forgive me, it was Eurovelo 9 or 10, and I think it was Eurovelo 10. And that was just for a shorter period, probably, I would guess, probably around maybe 500 or 600 kilometres, just up through Austria and through the beautiful country of the Czech Republic. I fell in love with the Czech Republic when I was there, and I veered off then towards Poland, and very shortly after meeting the Polish border, you're basically into Auschwitz there. That was the route. If you want to talk about equipment, I knew that I would be off grid for a lot of that. Mm-hmm. So one of the first things that I sourced online was a solar panel.
Brilliant.
So I had a solar panel to charge my phone at all times, because everyone knows nowadays that, if you haven't got your phone, it's almost like part of your body is gone. I relied on my phone for payment through Revolut, the Revolut app and all of that. And so I had a solar panel. I knew that it would be, from a budgetary point of view, it would be more reasonable if I camped a lot. And I knew that there were campsites all along those Eurovelos. So it made sense to camp as much as possible. And that kept my budget very manageable.
Brilliant.
And so I had a tent which was about the size of a loaf of bread. I had a sleeping bag which was the size of about a pint of Guinness. I had a solar panel which was a little bit bigger, probably about the size of the tablet that's in front of you at the moment, and it folded up into a little pencil case. I carried very little clothes. I had about 5 t-shirts, 2 pairs of shorts, 2 pairs of cycling shorts, 1 pair of runners, which I haven't burnt yet, but I should burn because I wore them every day for whatever the number of days that were there. I wore little sort of sockettes and I burned some of those because they just wore out. My stepdaughter-in-law gave me some bars of shampoo. I never knew there was such a thing as bars of shampoo. Yeah. So I had a couple of bars of shampoo. I had pseudo cream.
Yeah, essential.
Essential, yes, and used it. And actually, without getting into the details of it too much, that was the what would I say? It wasn't my lungs or my muscles or my legs that gave up at the end of the day. It was my backside.
Right.
After 5 hours of cycling, I would be very uncomfortable on the saddle, and I would start moving around for the next half an hour. And I just apply some pseudo cream and get another half an hour out of the backside and say, right, that's it. That's as much as the backside can do. So it was the comfort on the bike that caused me to stop at the end of every day, because I was going at a pace. I had probably 3-4 years training put in. I was out every morning. I do a route of about 16 miles, to about 25 kilometres every morning. And my body had been used to that. So upping that from, let's say, 25 kilometres a day, doubling that to 50 or 80 kilometres, over an entire day. I would do 25 hours in the morning before my breakfast. But to give yourself the entire day, it wasn't such a huge change, and so my physical fitness was okay.
Perfect.
And I'm 62 years of age. I was very happy with my level of fitness for my age, and I worked with a great guy by the name of Alan Lavin for many years. And while Alan is an environmental health officer, in his heart he is a gifted strength and conditioning coach, and he was at the end of WhatsApp for me. Like he gave me a diet sheet before I left. He's a man who's big into recovery. So he was on about, sleep is essential. And if you cannot sleep, well, then at least rest. Do not, basically, to use his words, he says, Donie, don't socialise the way you can socialise, or you'll be home in a fortnight.
You'll knock it out of Achill.
So, really, Florence, I find this unbelievable to think back on. But in all of the days that I was there, in 64 days on the bike, I wasn't out socially one of those evenings.
Imagine.
I was in my tent or in my, be it a B&B or whatever. I was there by 7:30 in the evening time. I would be asleep by 9. But then again, I would be up by 5 or 6 in the morning on the bike by either 6 or 7, depending on what time I got up. And
amazing, Donnie. And physically, I'd say you were tired come that time, 8, 9 o'clock at night. Would you have been able to go out and socialise, do you think?
I think I would have, but I knew it was the wrong thing to do. And another side of it as well is, and I people find this probably, people who don't think it through find it a bit unusual. There was very little crack, very little fun on it. Yeah, the enjoyment was, or the satisfaction was in the achieving it every day. I was on my own, as you said in your intro there. I had no support team, so I was with the exception of meeting Mandy in Vienna. I had nobody else from home around the place, and I was on my own. And I coined this phrase myself, that you make a 15-minute friend. I might have had my evening meal with, and as I did have, there was a lovely retired dentist from Germany that I had an evening meal with on 2 occasions. There was a young lad, Adrian, from the south of England, that I met a couple of times on the road. But generally, they're like just ships passing in the night. So you haven't any sort of soulmate with you, and you're on your own. So there wasn't, with the exception of one man from Clare that I met. He wasn't cycling. I just met him by chance. And if you want to hear that story,
tell us a little. I kind of did a bit of background research, so I know who it is. But please tell us this story, Donnie, because it's fascinating.
But with the exception of meeting this Clare man, I really had no home contact.
Yes.
And there was a loneliness to that as well. Yeah. But I'll just tell you, it was in a campsite on a Saturday afternoon beside a man-made lake, beautiful campsite. And it was 5 weeks since I had heard English spoken. And to put it bluntly, I was lonely. I was there. I knew what I had signed up for. I was able for it. My mental health was okay, but I was just downright lonely. And I heard this voice say, Niamh, you're out of your depth. Get back in. You're out of your depth. And I said, no, did I? Was that English? No, your mind is playing tricks with yourself. And a couple of minutes passed and I heard, Niamh, I told you, you're out of your depth. And I said, right, I've got to go searching. I've got to go searching. And I met this lad in his 40s, wearing his glasses, swimming. And I said, excuse me, but I couldn't help hearing your accent. Well, I gave him a shock. He looked at me out of the water and he said, where the Jesus are you from? And it wasn't, what country are you from? It was a given that I was from Ireland,
yes,
with my accent. And the way he asked the question, I knew he meant, what town are you from? I says, I'm from Boyle in County Roscommon. And he said, have you time to spare? I says, I'm okay until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. He said, well, we'll drink coffee. And we drank coffee for 3 hours and our horns locked. And he lived in Germany and he said, what the hell are you doing around here? Because I've lived here for 8 years and I've never, ever met an Irish person here.
Wow.
Other than the nearest city is Ulm. And he says, when I'm lonely, I go into Ulm because there's one Irish pub there and I will meet an odd Irish person in there. But he said, I've never met anybody other than in the Irish pub. So what are you doing here? I says, I'm cycling to Auschwitz. He says, you're mad, but it explains why you're here, So he was just a beautiful man and he had a beautiful German wife and he had 4 beautiful children who were so obedient and some of them just little toddlers, and they allowed us just, our horns locked and we devoured one another's company. We just needed each other so much. We were both sort of lonely for Ireland, really.
Fantastic, Donie. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect.
Couldn't have been better. And it transpired, some people will know his father because it transpired he is the son of an old Shanachie originally from Kerry, but living in Clare, called Eddie Lenihan. And Eddie Lenihan, I think, toured the schools around here once upon a time, and some people here remember him.
He did indeed, because we actually started to look into more about our old Irish heritage and history. We came across Eddie on some YouTube video, and he's a Shanachie that's the best of the best. Yes. His tone of voice, everything. And Carlo actually said that he came to the school in Boyle when Carlo was in school.
And I was telling that story to Keith Conroy, and Keith remembers him for the exact same reason, that they were both in the same age group.
And did you tell Owen that, Donie, that, or did he know that he had toured? Did Owen know his father had been in Boyle? Or
I don't think so. No. I don't think so. No, but I have been in touch with him since, and I've mentioned that to him since. So like we're still in sort of loose contact. But it was one of the very memorable events on the trip. Look, there were many memorable events, but really getting back to the point, it was about achieving your day's goal. And some of the scenery I cycled through on those days was just breathtaking. And I just thought, thank God for the health and the ability and the time and the space in my life to do this. It was just some of cycling along the Danube, and there was cycling through gorges and things like that were just phenomenal. So like I was very thankful and I enjoyed it, and I'm delighted that I have done it. But for pure fun and mad crack and drinking a few cans or a few pints or whatever, very little of that.
Yeah.
And there needed to be very little of that as well.
Yeah. And looking back, Donie, do you think you would have liked to have spaced it out a little bit longer and made time for a bit of crack and lingering in places a little bit more? Or are you just delighted the way it went and you're happy that you were physically, mentally, you accomplished what you wanted to accomplish? Would you change anything?
I wouldn't.
No.
It was. I thought. I married late in life.
Yes.
So I would have lived a lot of my life on my own, and I thought from a mental health point of view, and from a spending time on my own point of view, I thought I was pretty bulletproof. But I realised that I wasn't, and I missed Mandy and I missed my family, my extended family, more than I thought I would. So I was delighted. 2 months was enough for me, and I was delighted when it was over. What I would love to do is do another one with some people slightly shorter
Yes.
and have a bit of crack.
Yes.
You know, a more light-hearted, you know, go maybe without any definite destination or something like that. I would love that.
Yes.
But no, I had a set goal, and I'm very focused when I set a goal for myself in all aspects of my life. I'm quite focused when I want to be, and I was focused on that. And it was just as well that I was on my own as well, because it allowed me pick off my daily goals and my daily distances and all of that. And no, I would change. I would probably change nothing of it.
That's a really good thing.
Nothing.
That's a really good thing.
Yeah.
And Donie, just to touch on that a little bit, you had many highs, obviously meeting Mandy in Vienna. You had toured a very special guitar factory in Germany, and obviously meeting Owen when you needed to meet an Irish person. Was there any one moment in contrast to that where you thought, God, I'm struggling? Is there any chance that you might have given up along the way, or were you just so strong, so focused that there was never a little moment where you're like, God, maybe I'll hang on, or I don't know if I'll make it?
Yeah. No.
There
was never. There wasn't even a scintilla of a thought that I wouldn't do it.
Good man.
I just knew that the only thing that would prevent me from doing it would have been if I'd fallen into ill health. But in terms of my own effort and all of that, I had the luxurious situation that, like, if I had set 2 months for myself to do this, if it took me 3 months, I had that at home, and Mandy knew that as well. You know, if for some reason I have to slow up or I have to take a break for a while, Mandy knew that, you know, the expectation is that I would be home at the beginning of July, but if it's the beginning of August, so be it. So like that's a big luxury that very few people have, and I had that. So I always knew that I was going to make it, and I've lost my train of thought now with the question.
That kind of answered it, Donie. I was just asking, was there any specific moment where you had a doubt that you would get to the finish line? But you said no, you always knew you were going to make it.
Yeah. There was one day I was in a town which I'd never heard of before called Besançon in France. And it was quite a hot day, and I was trying to get my cycling done before the heat of the day got too intense. And cycling through Besançon, I got lost about 3 times, and the humidity was just the moisture was just dropping out of me. Like I thought at one stage it was raining, and it wasn't. It was my own sweat that was coming down off from inside my helmet, and I suppose I lost my I lost my focus in the town, and I couldn't get out of the city. And eventually I found my way out by asking a few questions, and there was one German cyclist got me onto his GPS, which was better than mine, and got me out of it. And no sooner had I just got on the right road again than the heavens opened, and there was a thunderstorm. And here I was saying, well, at least I'm on the right road. I'm in a thunderstorm, but I'm on the right road. And then bang, I got a blowout and I had a puncture. So luckily enough, the gods were looking down on me, Florence, because I had been in a bicycle shop 2 days earlier and I had bought a new tyre. And up until that point, I hadn't been carrying an extra tyre.
Wow.
And I needed a new tyre because this one had blown out. I was always carrying an extra tube, but on this occasion, I needed an extra tube and a tyre, and I had it.
Wow,
it was there.
Donie.
Yeah. So like, there might have been somebody looking down on me for all of that. I don't know. But that was the lowest, that day was the lowest point. And earlier on that day as well, I'd gotten lost. It was my day for getting lost. And I learned a lot from that day. I had meandered onto a motorway by mistake, and bicycles are not allowed on motorways in France. And I had to get off as quickly as I got on. And, you know, I was the draft of the big trucks passing by me. I was lucky that I wasn't killed.
Wow, Donie.
You know, so that was probably my worst day, but there was no way I was stopping either. Getting back to your first question, was there anything that might have made you stop? Like, unless something had happened at home that I needed to come home for, or unless I fell into poor health or sickness or something like that, you know?
Phenomenal. God, that was a test then. But look, every journey has to have a little test along the way. So
yes.
that was definitely yours by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
And Donie, the heat.
Yeah.
Can we touch on that for a minute? Because you cycled 2,807 kilometres in summer. And it took you 17 days, I believe, to get through France alone.
Yes.
The heat must have been phenomenal.
The heat in France was phenomenal. I was going through France in May, and it's the hottest recorded May in France in history. There were two bouts of 4 days apiece where the temperature exceeded 35.
Wow.
So I just thought, well, do I sit here and just sit in the shade underneath the hedge for 4 days? Or how do I manage this in the overall scheme of things? So what I decided was, look, let's just get up. I was looking at the weather app, and I just saw that up until probably about 10 o'clock in the day or 10:30 in the day, the weather, the temperature would be less than 30 degrees. And I had already cycled in about 28, 29 degrees. So I said, right, let 30 be the watershed temperature. So I said, I can cycle until it hits 30 degrees, and then I will stop. So what I did on those mornings was I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, dismantle my tent and gear and all of that, and pack up the bike. And I would be on the bike by within 45 minutes or an hour, definitely at the latest 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would cycle until about 10:30 in the morning. So my day would be finished at 10:30 in the morning on those days. But thank God, I think it worked out at about eight or nine of those days. There were definitely 4 in mid-May and then 4 in late May. And you do what you can.
Make do with what you have.
You make do with what you have, exactly.
As you said, what's your choice? You sit under a hedge for a few hours, or you get moving and make some hedgeway for the day.
And what I was very afraid of, and Darragh Loftus gave me a good strong lecture on it before I left, and he was right, the whole thing of sunburn and sunblock and all of that. And you see, on a bike, we often forget this, because we're travelling at a certain speed, even if it's a modest speed, you're still creating a little bit of wind, a little bit of a draft on yourself, so you don't feel yourself burning. And it's a very dangerous place to be when the sun is hot. And, I was very aware of that, thanks to Darragh, really. And I was very aware of that, and I took great care. I know on a number of days, I sunblocked myself 3 and 4 times. You'd
need to, Donie, the sweat and everything, you'd just be melting.
Yeah. And I can take the sun. I have skin that tans rather than burns. But even at that, I just took factor 50 the whole way and just said, look, forget about suntans. It's not about that. Just protect your skin and get through it,
And hydration then? How did you manage carrying your water?
Oh, gee, I had 2 litres on my back pretty much at all times, and I had 2 litres a little bit less than 2 litres on the bike, 1.5, 1.6 litres on the bike. But I was replenishing at every stop,
yes.
And I was basically stopping on the hour, really. And if you went into a restaurant or whatever, you just... because you were on these Eurovelos, all of the facilities there, be it campsites, restaurants, bars, whatever they were all very familiar with cyclists and the needs of cyclists. So you wouldn't even ask for replenishment of water. Once you went in with the bottles, they would take them off you and fill them up, and you were off again. Electrolytes.
Yes.
This is a thing, for people who mightn't understand this. If you sweat an awful lot, and I would be a sweater anyway, even with very limited exertion, I would sweat. But if you sweat, the saltiness that's in your sweat, that causes you health problems if you don't replenish those salts. So you have to replenish them through sachets of electrolyte. And I got a lot of advice from Paula in Natural Options on that. And my friend Alan as well was very much into that. Do not go a day without replenishing your electrolytes, which I carried them with me all the time. And at the end of the day, there was always a whack of electrolyte, the old drug whack into you, sort of getting ready for the next day. So they were all the things towards, that helped you towards recovery. And, the big thing, I remember reading it's in Paul O'Connell's, the Irish rugby player's autobiography. He says, when you feel thirsty, you're too late to hydrate.
Yeah.
You hydrate when you're not thirsty. So I was, and that's why I had the camel pack on my back. And for those people who don't know, it's just like a small little rucksack with basically a bladder of water on it and a tube that comes round, almost like an air pilot's microphone. So the tube is in front of your mouth all the time, and you're just sipping water all the time. Even when you don't want it, you're sipping it there.
And as he said, it doesn't let you get to a point where it's too late, because at that stage the damage is done.
Damage is done when you feel the thirst.
You don't know what would happen, yeah. And just in relation to one of your Facebook posts, you found a way to dispose of the water while you were on the bike as well, Donie, but we won't go into that. It's always a challenge for cyclists.
Well, I found a way that men can dispose of the hydration without getting off the bike.
Yeah. Women, it mightn't be as easy.
Yes.
So, Donie, you cycled through France, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, Czech Republic and Poland. The scenery, as you said, was unbelievable. You must have been at times just gliding through saying, it's a dream. It's a dream to have the health, the fitness, the opportunity to be here cycling. And just like you had said with that guy that you met, and the hardship he had been through on his journey, it must have just felt like a dream at stages where the scenery surrounding you, your journey, what you have done, the bit that's ahead of you. It must have been just like a dream at times.
It was phenomenal. Like, going along the Loire River and beautiful French villages that they have managed to retain. Their planning laws must be a bit better than ours here, in the sense that they have retained old stone buildings and stone cottages and stone restaurants and bars and all. And beautiful sort of winding narrow streets and castles and all sorts of buildings that you could imagine, and beautiful boats along the Loire, old traditional fishing boats and barges, and just then there were there seems to be oceans is the wrong word, but there seems to be acres upon acres of wheat being grown across Europe. I don't know whether it's that we're drinking a hell of a lot of beer or we're eating a lot of bread, but there were wheat fields everywhere. And I remember getting off my bike at the edge of one wheat field, and I could not see the other end of that wheat field. It must have been probably in excess of a mile long, I imagine. Just fabulous scenery. And then there were just the ordinary things as well. I remember cycling through a village in the Czech Republic, and at the time that I was going through, it was the time for the children to go to school. And all these little children were coming out of their houses and getting off buses and, coming up alleyways and things like that. And they were all carrying flowers. And I'm not sure exactly why, whether it was a religious thing, but I think it might have been their last day at school. It was some day towards the end of June, and I thought, maybe these flowers are for the school teachers. And they were lovely little sort of toddler little boys and girls, and they were coming with their school bags and their bunches of flowers. And I just thought, God is in his heaven. Life is good.
That's what makes it, Donie. Yeah, to see the locals there on their morning routines, and you're kind of in a way an observer. You're not on a train, you're not on a bus, you're in the open air, and you're just watching all of this go on. Yeah. Magic.
And somebody asked me, what did I learn from it? And what I learned is very basic and very simple, and it's that we are all the same. Whether you were born and reared in the Czech Republic or in France or in Germany or in Russia or in Australia. I sat having a cup of coffee beside two old ladies in some town in the Czech Republic. And a little boy and his mother passed down on the other side of the street. And the little boy spotted one of the women and got enormously excited. So his mother had to bring him across the road. And my little story in my head was that they were granny and grandson, I think. I'm not sure. But he fumbled in his pocket and he showed him a sort of a second-hand phone, which would have been an old calls and text phone that he probably got from his mother or his father. And he was showing his granny his new phone. And she was marvelling at this new phone. And she gave him a big hug. And he went off about his business with his mammy, happy that he had met his granny. And I just thought, that could have happened at the Town's Clock in Boyle. It could have happened in O'Connell Street in Dublin. It could have happened anywhere. So we were just the same. Like the love that there is between families or between members of family is still the same.
Yeah.
No matter what language we speak, no matter what the colour of our skin is, we all love our families
We
in
all,
a similar
I
way.
think we all want the same things as well.
Yes,
You know.
yes. All we want is a bit of joy and love in our lives and a bit of comfort and not to be worrying about things if we can get away with that. And a bit of health, of course.
Yeah. So true, Donie. And so you've gone through all those beautiful places, you've seen all those things, you've had your little bumps along the way. You're coming in over the border now into Poland. How do you feel? You're nearly at the finish line. Do you feel relieved that it's over, or how do you feel?
Relief would definitely be a major part of it. I can remember very clearly and will never forget let's say the last kilometre into Auschwitz. I had a beautiful cycle from the town of Katowice in Poland, probably for about 4 hours down to Auschwitz, and it was through sort of Google Maps. I'd gone off the Eurovelo and I was a bit nervous about this particular part, so I was sort of on my own. I was finding my own way, and I was using Google Maps with the cycle icon operating. So it was bringing me on back roads. It was keeping me away from the main roads. I had a beautiful cycle through rural Poland and ended up, I could see, the signposts were saying, Auschwitz 40 kilometres, Auschwitz 35, Auschwitz 25, and then I said, I'm close to it. Today is the day I'm going to make it there. And the last kilometre into Auschwitz is quite downhill. And I've been thinking still what really was going on inside me. I'm not sure, but I couldn't stop the tears flowing as I was freewheeling down the hill into Auschwitz. And I tell you, Florence, it was that, this is the journey's end. I have done it. It was that, no doubt. But it was also, it was so much in the air what had happened in Auschwitz back in the Second World War. And it's, you cannot avoid it. Just being there, walking the street, sitting down, having a cup of coffee in Auschwitz is different to sitting down, having a cup of coffee in any other place in the world. And in one way, it is the most horrible town in the world. And in another way, there's a lot of work going on in Auschwitz towards reconciliation and all of that. And I ended up staying in a campsite where a lot of this work was going on. And there were a lot of German secondary school students there, not voluntarily there, basically to look at, what has happened and, I suppose to face up to it as a nation, yet they're completely innocent because, they had nothing to do with it. But if for some reason, a lot of Germans come there to try to make peace with the whole lot, because there is a lot of peace to be made. And I don't think I will ever understand, having done the tours of Birkenau and the Auschwitz camp, I don't think I will ever understand why one person can do what was done in Auschwitz to another person.
Yeah.
It was just, it is mind-blowingly tragic, and I just don't know what we're made of that we can do that.
It's very scary, Donie.
It is incredibly scary, and I don't know whether, I have left it behind me, and that's another reason, going back to the very beginning of this interview, that is why I chose to do Achill to Auschwitz rather than Auschwitz to Achill, which is what Hullum did many years ago, more or less, is because I wanted to be home very quickly after. If I did it the other way around, I was going to experience Auschwitz and then carry that with me on my own on a bicycle for 2 months. And I said, hold on, I'm not sure that I'm able for that. So I knew within 48 hours, I would be back in the arms of my own family. And that's what I wanted to do, because it was nothing short of sickening to be there. I always wanted to be there. I'd never been there before. Right. And in my life, I says, I will not rest until I go to Auschwitz once. And sort of that's another reason why I'm very satisfied about having been there. But I could talk about this for another hour, but I will never get to the bottom of how one human being can be so barbaric to another human being. I just don't know what happened.
Yeah, it's horrific. And I was there myself a couple of years ago. We've been 4 times just because people say, why go 4 times? But I think it's just so important to remember, and it's so somber there. And you can go back as a reminder that what can happen when someone takes control and kind of does things that shouldn't be done. It's just scary. It's it's a very fitting place for you though, Donie. And I totally understand why you said that was going to be your finishing point rather than the starting point.
Yeah. And like, I suppose for many reasons, primarily because I had never been there before and I wanted to go there. That's why it became my finishing point. But I think, when the whole trip became a fundraiser as well, it was quite appropriate that was the finishing point as well, because that was, one of the iconic locations of the Second World War, and never to be forgotten. And we're in another war that could sort of escalate into anything. Who knows,
It's important to remember.
Important to remember, and that is the cry of the survivors of Auschwitz, is that we should never forget this. We should always remember this, and even most of those survivors, I think the number of people who are still alive is dwindling by the year, obviously. But even when they all go, it is almost on our shoulders to make sure that the next generation
absolutely
know about it.
Absolutely, and if that takes going over to do a tour, an audio tour, let that be it.
Yes.
Because it's kind of classed as dark tourism. People say, why go to those places? But I think it's so important to remember.
Yes.
So, Donie, that gets us to the point of home time. So talk to us about going to the airport and what happened in the airport.
How long do you have, Florence?
Oh.
No, look, really quickly. I cycled to the airport, packed my bike in the exact manner as I had packed it to come out, to get the Ryanair flight from Dublin to Nantes. Yet there was, to me, it was nothing short of just arrogance, I think. But there were two people on the luggage desk who refused to take my bike in, who said that it wasn't wrapped properly. I could show them photographs of how it had been wrapped back in May on the outward leg of the journey. But there was nothing happening. I was going nowhere. They advised me I should go to a pharmacy. So there was a language breakdown as well. Look, I can't give out about that because I couldn't speak Polish, but they definitely weren't making sense in English when they were sending me to a pharmacy to have my bike rewrapped properly. I just sort of tried to find out, what do you really want from me? And that's what they said. It needed to be wrapped tighter. Now, it wasn't like the skin of a drum, but there was no flapping parts of it. It was wrapped reasonably tightly and good enough for the outward leg of the journey, but obviously not good enough for the last leg. But the killing part about it for me, I says, I will rewrap it if you insist, but all of my tape and all of my zip ties are gone in the luggage that you've just checked in, so you're going to have to get that back from me. And he wouldn't do that. So it was just people who did not want to be helpful. And, we meet these people every so often in what would you say, who use the power of their position inappropriately. And that's what I was dealing with. And I just got the impression I was getting quite annoyed with them, and my fuse was a little bit short. And I just thought, if this argument escalates any further, they're going to call security and I may not get home at all.
Yeah.
So I just said, look, at that point in time, the bike was probably worth 150 to 200 euros, but it was worth an awful lot more than that to me.
Yeah.
And I would have loved to have brought it home. If I were never ever to cycle it again, I would have hung it up in the shed. But anyway, I didn't get it. I didn't manage to bring it home. And I gave it to a guy who was in the queue with somebody else, leaving somebody in the airport. And I had been talking to him, and I said I was going to leave it behind me. And he says, can I have it? And I says, yeah, it's yours. And I don't even know his name. And he doesn't, like, it all happened so quickly. He doesn't even know that bicycle cycled from the west of Ireland to Auschwitz. He doesn't know that either, which I'm very, even if he knew that, it would make it a little bit easier to swallow. But look, I came home. The most important thing is that I came home safe, and I could have fallen off that bike and ended up in hospital. But I came home, and I must have given my brother an awful headache, because I was to meet him in Dublin on the Sunday that I arrived, and we were going to take 3 days to cycle back to Boyle together. And he had arranged various people to meet us at various points. There were people, I know that Keith Keith Conroy,
Conroy.
and John Carty were going to meet us at Longford, and Jerry Morris was going to meet us in Carrick-on-Shannon, and this had all gone on behind my back. So he had to scrap all of that. But I got home and I was going in for my tea, thinking I was going to the Creeving for my tea on the Sunday evening when we were driving up the Crescent, and I saw all of my musical friends outside Dodds playing music, and I just knew straight away. I said, this can't be for anyone other than me. They'd never play outside, and they know that I'm home. And we just had a great night in Dodds, and Magella Dodd landed me with a pint of Guinness, the most beautiful gift you could land me with my love for the stuff.
Especially at that time.
Yeah, and it was just, we had a lovely, and like my family were there, all my extended family, and all my I would call them my musical family were there, and it was just one of the special nights of my life, and it was just wonderful. And they treated me like, I don't know, dare I say it, they treated me like a little bit of a hero, which I didn't think I deserved at all, but I still enjoyed it. I was a bit embarrassed by it, but we had one hell of a night, and it was just wonderful.
That is fantastic, Donie. That's what it's all about too.
Yeah,
you know.
And I was so delighted to be home, Florence. I couldn't tell you how glad I was to be at home, for the reasons of doing it, and also for the reasons of having missed the people I missed. You know, I didn't realise that I would miss people. I didn't realise how connected I was to people, to my wife, Mandy, and to my brother and sister and my extended family and all of that. I missed them so much. I was gobsmacked by the level of loneliness that I experienced out there at times, you know. But I was just so delighted to be home, and so delighted to be in Dennis Dodd's pub, drinking pints of Guinness and playing jigs and reels.
And no tent to put up.
And I haven't put it up since.
Oh,
and I
bless.
probably won't.
Oh,
for a while.
Bless, Donie.
Yeah.
Well, what a story. Just to finish, a massive, massive congratulations. I know you say you're not a hero, but it's some story, some achievement that you've done, and you should be very proud of yourself. I know people in Boyle are very proud of you, and you should be very proud of yourself. Amazing story, an amazing accomplishment. Well,
look, Florence, I'm very humbled to think that you would come out here to my house in the Copse, even to do this. You know, that it merits that. But I'm delighted.
Yeah,
I'm delighted that you have, and that it's now sort of it's put down and recorded for posterity.
100%, and that's the whole idea. Yeah. You know, it's your story. Like, we all think, I don't have a good story to tell and this and that, but everybody, it may not be a big challenge, it may not be a big thing, an accident to somebody else, but everyone has their own little story, and no matter what we think, that story will inspire somebody else in their own lives that may be struggling. You know, somebody might be listening to this podcast, they might want to do a similar journey, and they might think, God, if Donie can do it, I'll do it. You know,
and my advice to somebody like that is, do it in bite-sized pieces.
Yeah.
You know, I think the Chinese have this saying that the first step of 1,000 mile, the first, what is it? Something like, if you've got to do a 1,000-mile journey, the first step is the first step, and the next step is the next step. And you know, if you cut something down into bite-sized pieces, it's amazing what can be done. Like, when I think of the length of it, like, you know, 2,800 kilometres rolls off the tongue. Like, that is quite a colossal amount of mileage. But if you do 40 kilometres a day, 80 kilometres a
chipping
day,
away,
50 kilometres a day, you're chipping it all there. And if you have the time to do it, you can do it.
Absolutely. And then at the end, you accomplish your goal, and you get to spend a night in Dennis Dodd's pub with the pint of Guinness, and it's all worth it.
Absolutely.
And you'll have those memories forever, Donie.
Yes.
And thank God now we have it recorded. We'll have those memories forever to listen back to.
Hopefully. Yeah.
And Donie, just to finish, is there anything that I haven't touched on, anything I haven't asked that you would like to talk about? Anything at all?
There isn't really. You've done your research very well, Florence, and I think I'm very impressed by yourself and Carlo. You know, sending me a list of what you had asked me prior to the interview. It was very nice of you to do that, and it just showed how organised you are and all of that. And just all I would like to say to you, there's nothing left for you to ask me, but all I would like to say to you is the best of luck with these podcasts, because they are very important.
Thank you so much, Donie. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. And that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, we'd really love if you could share the podcast on social media. You can find us on Facebook by searching for Voices of Boyle. We'd also love to hear your feedback and suggestions, so feel free to reach out to us via our website at www.voicesofboyle.com. And finally, we're always looking for new guests, so feel free to drop us a message if you'd like to jump on and have a chat with us. Thanks again, and chat soon.